Coming to you from an undisclosed location, somewhere deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli. I have a very special guest today, Derek Gilbert. We go back years and more years, and it's always great to see him, always great to talk about what he's into. We'll be talking about his upcoming trip to Israel and some of the sites, megalithic sites that he's going to be exploring. So I think he has room. We'll find that out. First, a word from our very trusted sponsor. As we wrap up 2025, it's a good time to slow down and reflect on the year. If there's one thing we've all learned, it's that uncertainty isn't temporary. It's the world we live in now. Waiting for things to go back to normal isn't a plan, it's a gamble. For over a decade, my friends at Noble Gold Investments have helped Americans just like you protect themselves and the people they love by diversifying their wealth with gold and silver. Look, nobody knows what 2026 will bring. One thing is for sure. In an uncertain world, real wealth isn't digital. It's physical, it's lasting, and it's yours. When you're sitting around the table this holiday season, surrounded by family, remember, the best gift you can give isn't under the tree. It's peace of mind. And that's what Noble Gold delivers, peace of mind. 1 ounce at a time. Before the year ends, take one smart step toward a safer future. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com. Get your free wealth protection kit today. noblegoldinvestments.com. Don't leave the future to chance. Peggy and I have invested some of our money in Noble Gold, and I got to tell you, folks, we're really glad we did. However, as with any investment, there's always a risk. Please weigh the risks and carefully consider investing in Noble Gold. Once again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. We invested, and I'm really glad we did. Derek, thanks so much for coming on the record. You and I go back, I don't know, 12, 15 years, something like that. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think when we look back through our app at the archives, it's probably a little longer than that, but it is always an honor to talk with you because, as I'm not ashamed to say, it was your book, the Nephilim, which was of course a novel that really got me excited about hey, this is in the Bible, and so let's start digging into this and studying this, and that has led to I've lost count of number of books. There are at least 9 or 10 in the last 8 years, and there's always something new that comes out, and we Sharon and I with our book The Gates of Hell wrote about the geography of Jesus' ministry and where he was baptized and why it's not down near Jericho where everybody thinks it was, in fact, a declaration of war in the land of Bashan. And the book I'm working on now is about how this whole supernatural war that we're seeing play out in the headlines. I mean, as we're recording this, things happening that are related to the supernatural war for control of the Holy Land.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you just can't. And it's all there. And yet the mainstream media won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Anything supernatural is too woo-woo. And I understand that. But, you're a supernaturalist. I'm a frank supernaturalist. And so we're always looking for, what's really going on here behind the scenes. But you're going to Israel. And I mean, I just, I don't want to go to Israel right now for the obvious reasons. But tell us about the tour and where you'll be headed, please.
Well, we're leaving on October 19th, and so we'll really kick off the tour on the 20th of October, 2025. Of course, we were there last spring when things were really hot in Gaza. I mean, we looked down into Gaza from a hill at the city of Sderot. There's an overlook, and we could hear the Israeli artillery as they were beginning the operation at Rafah, which is the border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. Things have cooled down considerably since last May, but having said that, just as we're recording this today, the IDF had issued alerts for the city of Ashdod, which is just north of Ashkelon, which borders on the Gaza Strip, because Hamas launched 5 projectiles toward Ashdod and then a couple of others in what they call the Gaza envelope, which is the area just to the east of the Gaza Strip, which is where we were last May. We visited the site of the Nova Music Festival, and we will be going back there. We're going back to see the Nova Music Festival site. We'll visit some of the communities that were attacked, like Be'eri and Ofakim and Sderot, where the police station was overrun during that awful morning of October 7th, 2023. just to show people that this supernatural war that we talk about and that we've been talking about, that you've been talking about for decades now, Sharon and I, not quite as long. We're a little, coming late to the party, but trying to catch up, that there are physical consequences that are being played out in real time right before us. And that's why when we go back beginning October 19th, we want to take people to some of these sites, but we'll also go to the other sites that go back 6,000 years and more to the pre-biblical era to show how this is how the supernatural and the natural connect. That's really what this tour is going to be about.
It's bizarre that this little chunk of land, all the stuff, Mount Hermon, the fallen angels coming down, the whole pre-flood thing, and then it plays out with the Nephilim. And isn't it interesting how Gaza was never conquered by Joshua and Caleb? They let it go.
Right.
It's like right there in our Bibles. It's right there. Tell us some of the megalithic sites that you're going to be visiting. That's fascinating.
Well, one that I know that you've been to, and our good friend Mondo Gonzalez has been to, Gilgal Rephaim, or Wheel of the Giants on the Golan Heights. We had the opportunity, Sharon and me, and then Doug and Janelle Van Dorn, back in 2023. We spent a day there with archaeologist Dr. Mike Freakman, who's done the most recent excavations there.
I read his paper, right.
Yeah, and he's hilarious because he looks like a biker. He's a Russian Jew, so he speaks with the Russian accent, and we tell him, he's explaining something to us inside the central core of Gilgal Rephaim, and no, we read your papers about this. You're the ones. Now I must kill you. And he's got a Fu Manchu mustache, and but just to give you an idea how this war has affected Israel, he's been called up twice now for reserve duty, and he's been deployed into Gaza. So you've got an archaeologist who is more than 10 years past peak fighting age.
Yeah.
Who is now, and he's not alone. 10% of Israel has been deployed in this. But Gilgal Rephaim, as he explains, is related to the cult of the dead. He showed us the serpent mound of Bashan and the structures there, including what appear to be dwellings occupied by the priests who tended to Gilgal Rephaim. He's kind of unique in dating the megalithic structures on the Golan Heights. Most Israeli archaeologists will put those structures in the Bronze Age. Dr. Freakman did something which I thought was brilliant and made just all kinds of logical sense. He looked at the location of ancient dwellings, where they could identify villages in the various periods of history, late Bronze, Middle Bronze, Early Bronze, Chalcolithic, or the Copper Age. And he found that in the early and Middle Bronze Ages, there weren't enough dwellings near Gilgal Rephaim, and most of these megalithic structures called dolmens, which look like giant tables made of stone, for them to be constructed. There just wasn't the workforce close enough for a guy to, walk with his little lunch bucket from his home to the site of the construction and then walk back home again at night. But there was during the Copper Age, the Chalcolithic. So based on that and a process called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, he was able to date Gilgal Rephaim to about 3710 BC. That's about 1,200 years older than the estimate for Stonehenge and for the Great Pyramid of Giza, which means there was an organized civilization on the Golan Heights, ancient Bashan, the place of the serpent, 1,200 years to almost 2,000 years before anybody thought there were enough people there to do this kind of thing. So we'll be going there.
Wow.
If we have time, and I hope we do, we'll go to the Serpent Mound again and show people up there the structures on the back of that Serpent Ridge. There are more than 140 megalithic burial sites up there on the back of this serpent-shaped ridge that makes the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio look like
child's play.
Yeah. It's like 3/4 of a mile long, so it's like 3 times longer. It's 20 feet high and 200 feet wide. It's huge. And he found that many of these megalithic sites or structures on the back, which look like giant piles of rock, or tumuli, as scholars would call them, when you section into them, they're structured exactly like Gilgal Rephaim, concentric rings of stone around a central core. this echoes this design that is seen at ancient sites around the world of a central dot with rings around it, which, in his view, he argued suggests a portal from this realm to the next. So that's one of the sites we'll be visiting, but we're going to go a couple of new places we've not been. One of them is the Shamir Dolman Field. This is named for the kibbutz. The Dolman Field is just outside the Shamir kibbutz. And among the 400 dolmens in this field is one with a capstone that they estimate, that's the tabletop, if you will, they estimate it at 50 tons.
And
That's like 2 fully loaded 18-wheelers on an American highway. How did they get that up there?
wow. How did they quarry it? How did they move it from point A to point B and then lift this thing? It's just like, what are we looking at here?
Exactly. What I found most interesting is this. The archaeologist who did the survey of the Golan Heights and the Jordan River Valley, or the Hula Valley, which is the valley through which the Jordan River flows from Mount Hermon down to the Sea of Galilee, is surrounded by about 1,100 dolmens on the hillsides looking down into this valley. And according to the archaeologist who did this survey of these locations, they said this Shamir Dolman Field was the center of the dolmen building culture of the ancient Levant. So you go to that location, you see this massive structure, and there's another one with a capstone that looks pretty big. In fact, Doug Van Dorn and I thought we'd found it, and then our good friend Aaron Lipkin says, no, come over here. This is the one. And it's like, oh yeah, this is even bigger.
Wow.
It looks down into this valley. Now, when you look at Scripture, Matthew chapter 4 in particular, which records Jesus moving to the city of Capernaum, which is where the Jordan empties into the Sea of Galilee, he wrote that this was to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 9. Those dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. Those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. Now, is it possible that that Jordan River Valley is the valley of the shadow of death? Remember what it says.
That's really interesting.
In Psalm 23,
Yeah.
Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Again, these dolmens, in fact, the word dolmen comes from a Celtic language, Brittonic, that means table.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to show people this dolmen and suggest that what you are looking at as you look down into this beautiful valley that looks like an agricultural section of the American Midwest, this could be the valley of the shadow of death, because it's mentioned in Canaanite myths as the place where Baal was killed by the death god Mot and then eventually brought back to life. It is there's another epic poem from the Canaanite, is called the Epic of Akkad, where a young man is killed because he refuses to give the war goddess his magic bow. And the father says, I will mourn for him. I will search for him. And when I find him, I will mourn for him. And I will bury him at a tomb for the underworld gods. Well, that's a phrase that the Canaanites used to refer to the Rephaim, the spirits of the Nephilim, the mighty men who were of old. Mm-hmm. When he finally finds his son, he says, I will mourn for him and bury him at a tomb at Kinneret, which is the Sea of Galilee. So we're seeing all these geographic clues that point to this region between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon as supernaturally charged, which again, getting back to our book, The Gates of Hell, which is why we argue Jesus declared his divinity at the foot of Mount Hermon, Caesarea Philippi, the gates of hell, but he was also baptized in that area very close to Capernaum, north of the Sea of Galilee, because it's part of that region. It was a declaration of war against the Rephaim, against these spirits, the demonic spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. And of course, we'll go to Capernaum, we'll go out in the Sea of Galilee, because now you've got this really brings whole new meaning to Jesus walking on the water.
Yeah.
Because the sea represents primordial chaos. But there's an Israeli archaeologist who suggests that the Canaanite myths that locate the threshing floor, the abode of their father god El, the two deeps of El, or the source of the two deeps, as being at or under the Sea of Galilee. And I argue in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, Saturn is Kronos, who is El of the Canaanites, who is Molech
Right.
of the Hebrews, who is Dagon of the Philistines, who, of course, was the chief deity of the people who lived in the Gaza Strip. So it all connects.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, really. It really is. And you're such the level. I love the way you present it in a very accessible and yet very scholarly way. Let me ask you something. We know that Israel has taken the southern part of Syria. Is that close? Now, I haven't looked at a map, but is it close to those very large cities that were there? You know what I'm talking about here.
Right. There was a book called The Giant Cities of Bashan.
Yeah. Did they annex that, or don't you know?
They're holding it as a buffer zone.
Right.
The Golan Heights extends well into the Syrian side of the territory. In fact, the kingdom of Og was the two battles that Moses and the Israelites fought against Og of Bashan were on the Syrian side of the border. The cities of Ashtaroth, which had been identified as a ruin. Edrei is the modern city of Deraa, which is on the border between Syria and Jordan on the Yarmouk River. So again, we know where those are, and they're on the Syrian side of the border. So all of that belonged to ancient Bashan, was taken and given to the eastern half of the tribe of Manasseh.
Right.
When the Israelites settled the land. So yeah, they could be holding that. And of course, they also captured the summit of Mount Hermon when the government of Bashar al-Assad fell, and Israel is holding the summit of Mount Hermon. So yeah, Israel's got control of many of those supernaturally charged sites. I don't know how many of them are aware of or have the same kind of worldview that you and I do, but I imagine there are a few who do.
Yeah. What's interesting is Mount Hermon was not controlled by the Jews, by the Israelis, for a couple thousand years. And all of a sudden, here we are. And, for me, it's hugely prophetic. It's like, oh my gosh, this is where as Chuck Missler used to say, all the mischief started. Mount Hermon. This is book of this we all come down. And now you can access the little temple, which was on the Syrian side, where I think they found that stele there.
Yes.
So and Doug Hamp did a sort of went back and looked at the translation, which was very interesting too. Hats off to Doug. But I wonder if that's accessible, because if it would, I mean, just to be able to go there and see that.
Yeah. I imagine because the military is holding it as an observation post into Syria, probably not.
Probably.
But yeah, it would be fascinating to see, especially to get up to the summit, because the summit, according to Sir Charles Warren, had been scooped out to receive drink offerings. Yeah. And this drink offering, in fact, in ancient Hebrew was referred to as Yared, which is the same word as Jared or Jordan. So there was a scholar named Edward Lipinski who argued that the days of Jared, referred to in the book of First Enoch, when the Watchers came down, didn't actually mean the days of the patriarch Jared. It meant during the days where that drink offering was poured out in the summit of Mount Hermon. Interestingly, when Warren found that stela, he also found a low stone wall that forced people who were going up to the summit to perform this ritual had to take it counterclockwise.
Wow.
And Warren in 1869 connected that to the counterclockwise, what do they call it? Circumambulation, the counterclockwise march of the Muslims around the Kaaba in Mecca, because they believe that there are stones from 5 sacred mountains in the Kaaba, one from the Mount of Olives, one from Jebel al-Nur, where Muhammad got his alleged revelation, the Mountain of Ararat, and let's see, Mount Carmel, and the other was Mount Hermon. So yeah, it's interesting that this ritual of circumambulating may begin on Mount Hermon. And bringing it back to Gilgal Rephaim, we actually discussed this with Dr. Freakman at Gilgal Rephaim. His mentor, his archaeologist mentor, Dr. Yossi Garfinkel, wrote a book about 15 years ago on ritual dance in the ancient world.
Wow.
He said that in the ancient Near East, and I cited this in The Gates of Hell, that 80 to 85% in the ancient Near East, which included ancient Israel, of the depictions of humans were of humans dancing. And they were dancing almost always in profile like this, dancing counterclockwise. Dr. Freakman argues that that was the purpose of Gilgal Rephaim, that the sections, the spokes, if you will, in Gilgal Rephaim were added later by Bedouins who were trying to use that structure to keep their goats and their sheep in place. But back in the day, it was used for ritual, dance, for speaking to, communicating with, hearing from the ancestors, which of course were actually the demonic spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. So once again, it all connects, and it may all go back to Mount Hermon, which on a clear day, as you know, is visible from Gilgal Rephaim.
Unbelievable. Interestingly enough, in Peru and all throughout the Southwest and really pretty much everywhere, you see these spirals. And I've talked to Chief Joseph about this and other First Nation people, if the spiral goes clockwise, they're telling you it's a good place to be. But when the spiral goes counterclockwise, don't go there. And interestingly enough, the TV show which people are watching about that little supernatural place out there, counterclockwise spirals. And we see this, clockwise and counterclockwise. So just really interesting that, all this counterclockwise movement of people opens up gateways, opens up portals. It's just
right. And again, it may all go back to Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
And as Sir Charles Warren found, that wall leading up to the summit of Mount Hermon forced you to approach counterclockwise.
Wow. That's really profound. So let's switch a little bit. On September 23rd, Rosh Hashanah, 24th, that whole, a lot of people were looking for the rapture. We covered that. We talked about it. It's like, my hand's on the plow. Am I expectant? Heck yeah. Especially with where we are. Could happen at any moment. We don't know. In the meantime, we have work to do, right? And so that's what we're doing. But what I find interesting is during that period of time, the 23rd and the 24th, the UK and France and Canada and Australia basically called for a Palestinian state. Now that's, in my opinion, that's prophecy being fulfilled, maybe not in toto, but certainly to the point where those of us who are looking at the biblical prophetic narrative, looking at this, and that's like a huge line in the sand. The whole world almost has turned against Israel. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen it since October 7th of 2023. The world sympathized with Israel as long as the fresh images of destruction on the Israeli side of the border were being broadcast. Once the images shifted to what was happening on the Gaza side, then the world began to turn against Israel. And now we're seeing Christians who are declaring that Israel is the bad guy in all of this. Hamas is getting what it wants out of this, which is why Hamas is dragging out this conflict. Again, as we were recording this today, the Israeli Defense Forces have control of more than half of Gaza City and most of the rest of the Gaza Strip. And yet they're still firing projectiles into Israel. They're not laying down their weapons. They're not returning the hostages. In fact, they declared that they would move the hostages above ground to put them in harm's way. They are dragging this out because the more the world sees images of suffering coming from the people of Gaza, the more the pressure builds on Israel to put an end to this. Now, I know there are some who said that Benjamin Netanyahu did this for political gain, that he needs this to preserve himself. I think that's a fundamental misreading of Israeli politics. Netanyahu will probably historically be blamed for what happened on October 7th. And I know that there are theories that there was the stand down order that
right.
Our friends in Israel, Israelis who are connected both politically and in the military, conservative, religious, Orthodox Jews, they tell us, first of all, the Israeli society, 60% conservative, most of them support Netanyahu, 20% Arab, 20% socialist. The socialists make up the bulk of the deep state in Israel, and Israel's deep state hates Netanyahu the way ours hates Donald Trump. The deep state there controls the judiciary, which is out of control because they don't have a constitution in Israel to rein in the power of the judiciary, the Supreme Court. It can overrule any law passed by the Knesset just by saying it's unreasonable. You don't need to be a legal scholar to understand that that is a loophole big enough to drive a tanker truck through.
And then,
Secondly, the IDF is controlled by the socialists. We are told by those who know, people who live there, that you don't get to the upper level of the IDF or the IAF if you're not a socialist. They don't trust Netanyahu. He is not deep state. He is an outsider. He was educated in the United States, which to the Israeli deep state makes him an outsider. They believe one of two things is true. Either the IDF was overconfident in the use of technology to surveil the border. It didn't think that Hamas had the technical know-how to compensate for the use of these passive devices to keep an eye on the border, that they were overconfident in their belief that Hamas was deterred, that Hamas was too intimidated by the power of the IDF to dare attack, or they just didn't tell Netanyahu what they knew, because we do know
right.
from a report that was issued several months ago that the Israeli Defense Intelligence was aware that Hamas was doing things on the unusual things, planning, drilling on their side of the border. They concluded, no, they're just doing it for show, just to keep the people of Gaza happy. See what we're doing. We're going to stand up to those Israelis someday. They think, our friends that is, that they perhaps did not share this with Netanyahu because they didn't want him to do something foolish like send the military into Gaza. The way our Pentagon admits that after Trump's first term, they admitted, we didn't tell him things we didn't want him to know. We told him we were pulling out of Syria, but we didn't. We didn't tell him, that we were slipping information to the Chinese so that they wouldn't think Trump was going to go to war. So our friends are telling us either one or more of those things is true. Netanyahu didn't let it happen. It was not a false flag. Netanyahu does not gain anything politically by letting this drag on because, as I said, 10% of Israelis, the population has been called up, which means you've got families that are separated, men and women who can't go to their regular jobs because they've been called up into the reserves, crops that can't get planted or harvested, which is why you've got ministries over here that are asking people to volunteer to go over there and pick fruit off trees and stuff.
Wow.
The longer this goes on, the more it tears up the Israeli economy and Israeli society. Netanyahu politically would benefit by ending this today rather than trying to put an end to Hamas. But Hamas they are religious fanatics. They live Islam the way Muhammad lived it in the 7th century. If you do not crush Hamas, if any semblance of that organization survives, it will emerge from their tunnels like cockroaches coming into the sunlight, declare victory, and they'll wind up in control not just of Gaza, but of Judea and Samaria as well.
That's the goal. That's the goal. I'm here with actually, I want to thank my editor, Sonda Allison, for queuing up or hooking Weston and I together. And Weston is an inventor. He's a scientist. He's got a different take on what a lot of people in mainstream science and academia have. And that's why he's here. But Weston, thanks so much for coming on the record. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to be on your show. I've watched your show for many years, and I'm
thank you.
glad that we got introduced, because I thought, well, a general email, you probably never respond, but we had connections to get us together, and I think this is going to be a phenomenal interview.
Well, I thank you for that. And, all glory to Jesus, all glory to the King. But, here's the deal. We were talking off camera, and let me just lead up to this. We know from the Bible, it's not specifically stated, but it's inferred that there's going to be in the last days a one world government and a one world religious system, which immediately begs the question, well, how's that ever going to work? But we know with technology that it can work very easily, and like that, if the powers that be get their way. So we're talking about singularity. We're talking about the advent of AI, where I no longer can tell what's real and what's fabricated, which to me is a line of demarcation, a Rubicon, and that's it. I mean, we've never been here before where you can't ascertain what's real and what's fabricated. And then you get, Gates talking about, well, we're just going to have you're not going to need your cell phone anymore because all you have to do, we'll just implant this thing in your body and, that will be your cell phone. So we are in a very brave new world. So my question is twofold. Where do you think this thing is going? And two, does this mean that the return of the king, that Jesus is going to come back soon because you can't fix this anymore?
Yes, I can address both those questions. How much time do we have on the show? Am I able to go back a little bit to explain my history?
Absolutely. We have at least 30 minutes. Yes.
Science background. Okay, so I'm a research scientist, and like many, I was classically trained in your universities worldwide, and it emphasizes atomic theory. Well, for over 20 years, probably close to 25 years or so, I started to realize I think field theory, which some of the great minds of recent history, I'll rattle off a few, just Charles Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, Victor Schauberger, Michael Faraday, the Faraday cage, Nikola Tesla, Buckminster Fuller, more recently Eric Dollard, individuals like Ken Wheeler. They understand field theory very well. As the more I studied, field theory to me is a more accurate model describing how life works, our reality, our universe, versus atomic theory. So in field theory, it deals with frequencies and interaction with frequencies with the etheric field. And I specialize in cold plasma production and bipolar ionization, and the technology I've developed over the years, and patents for whatever that's worth. It takes a lot of money and many years to get patents, and then your patent is only as good as your finances to defend it. But the technology I have works on viruses, bacteria, mold, mildew, contaminants in the air and surfaces. So I'm well known in that field of cold plasma, bipolar ion generation. But as I had studied this, I started to realize how important frequencies and with the etheric field, how they interact. And that's a more accurate model. It also is more in harmony with my background. I have an extensive background in ancient texts and scriptural studies, over 18,000 hours. So that's equivalent of a dual PhD. Wow. if you want to do the numbers. So I've many degrees and sciences and backgrounds in these ancient texts, and I was able to combine the two and understand that there's a thread or theme that's connected. So always when I give presentations in seminars and conventions, and I had a YouTube channel for many years until it got yanked during the 2021, 2024 period globally. You know what that means.
Yep.
Because if you don't tote the narrative, you get the axe. Yep. So what's interesting is what we're seeing today, and it's really picked up speed since the advent of CERN, and then the roots of the internet from the engineers of CERN from Great Britain and the others that developed that, what now we call the internet, from the 80s through today. It has really accelerated the change that we're seeing in technology and society and behavior. It's all linked together for an agenda, and the scriptures touch on that, as you mentioned in this intro. As far as the time period, it's very grave and serious what's happening to humanity right now, what we're facing, decisions that we have to make, and, if you want to use the term, fulfillment of scriptural prophecies, or a very critical timeline that we're living in. So I can either stop there and have you ask another question, or go into detail as to which of part of the two questions you want me to address first.
Let me jump in. I think you mentioned CERN. I've been to CERN, and why do they have Shiva in the courtyard? Number one. Number two, why would anyone have a blatant occult ceremony to dedicate the whole,
right?
And I'm looking at that going, excuse me, a guy with a goat's head, in the middle of the night, tramping down it's like,
yes,
I'm not buying the official narrative. We were there. We had a guide, a docent, who took us around, and it was just a party line. And I kept throwing questions at him. Well, is it true that there's a possibility of opening up a gateway or a portal? I know nothing about that. And it was deny. But we've got on record the former president of CERN stating that, well, there's a possibility that something could come through and we can't stop it. Your thoughts on that? Is that just hype, hype, or is it grounded in real science?
Well, since this is our first interview, I'll try to be polite, and I'll be a little more reserved. Usually after the third interview, I let everything loose, and people are never the same. Well, yeah, really, once they get the real truth. And before I answer that, it's very hard. If you were where I am and the other scientists in our group, what we understand, it is very shocking for the general audience. And usually most human consciousness kind of refuses to comprehend what we've come to know because it's too frightful.
I do this is sure.
Yeah, so most people revert back to their safe paradigm, their safe reality. I hate to use the term safe space, but if you try to pop their reality bubble and show them what's really going on, they'll retreat to something very comfortable, and then they immediately go in denial. It's human nature, and I think the power structure is relying on the masses to behave that way. But in our close discussions, CERN, if you talk about a portal, well, a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of podcasts and social media that've talked about this topic. If CERN were to do that, what they call a hadron collider, trying to find the God particle, I think that's the cover story. Yeah, that's your Wikipedia notes, and that's the funding. I don't think that's at all what the facility's for. If it's portal related and they're successful in a portal, a lot of people say it's to let something in. No, it's to let something out. Actually, to let something out, not let entities in, but let entities out.
So let me ask you a $64,000 question. What entities are we talking about?
Well, if you want to use scriptural references,
okay,
I'll try to be as neutral as possible because the people get very sensitive when you're dealing with their faith and scriptural understanding. You could have 100 people in a room; they'll fight like cats, and everyone has. So, and I don't want to act like a know-it-all or discuss my credentials. What good is that? And people don't know me. But if you really know my background, so the scriptures mention that if you mention Christ Jesus, the role, his heavenly role that he's in, one of the roles that he plays in heaven is he's head of the heavenly military. So he's head of this kingdom, and he's pictured on the military, the white horse with the generals, and he has a sword. Anyway, in those series of visions that the Apostle John had, there were glimpses in Daniel, other prophets of the Hebrew text, that talks about a war breaking out in heaven. And then Satan and the demons, which are general categories, if you want to use the term fallen angels or spirit entities in that realm, were cast down to the vicinity of the earth. The text had mentioned the vicinity of the earth, or other translations, within our solar system, however term that you want to use. There's no point in getting too technical in a short interview. But if that's the case, then you have a scenario where entities that are multidimensional and had free access to the heavenly realm, that comes to an end, and they're confined to the vicinity of the earth. So if you have a portal that can allow them to escape and back into the realms that they used to exist and travel, that's why you want a portal, to be able to go back from hence you came, not to be confined here for the future event mentioned as Harmageddon or Armageddon in English translation.
Right. I've never thought of it that way. That's extremely interesting. In other words, let me just put a cap on this, maybe, that these entities are earthbound and they have no ability to get off Earth anymore. They're stuck here. And so by opening up a gateway or a portal through CERN, and this is all conjecture, they're able to go back into the second heaven. Let me ask you this, since we're on the subject. I know that shamans, take concoctions like ayahuasca, and they are propelled into the second heaven. So they supernaturally, or let me through natural means, open up a supernatural entry point to access the second heaven. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, from field theory, what you're describing is the etheric field. Um, I don't know. Some of it's confidential. I don't know what I can say without getting in trouble from our research group.
Just be careful.
Okay. Let's, this isn't exactly correct, but this is the closest human terms to illustrate for your general audience. The best way to describe the etheric field would be, it'd be identified as a liquid material. So the etheric field is it's highly dense, but it'd be similar to like maybe black Jello.
Okay.
Remember your mom growing up, your mother maybe having a Jello dessert, maybe there's sliced bananas or something, and you jiggle the Jello. It kind of, okay. So the etheric field is a highly energized, multidimensional material, and that's where consciousness, that's where everyone's thoughts and actions and behaviors, everything is stored in the etheric field. All dimensional life is the etheric field. And the etheric field is energized by the entity mentioned in Isaiah, the Hebrew scriptures in Isaiah, where it talks about the dynamic energy. And that's given a name as the Almighty or the Source. A lot of people say Source, Creator. You can put your favorite expression in there.
El Shaddai.
Yeah. So when there's astral projection or remote viewing or the ayahuasca, what happens is you're able to enter that etheric field, and conscious entities present or individuals in the past who are in a sleep-like state, but their whole life, say from birth, and they passed away at age 60, but they lived 3,000 years ago, that whole experience is recorded. It's in the etheric field. Some people might have the ability, I'm not saying I do, but some people might have the ability to tap into the etheric field and have access to memories of someone who lived 3,000 years ago, male or female, or other entities that aren't carbon-based like we are. And that's what you're describing.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. I mean, we could, and I'm going to have you back on because I can see we're just going to scratch the surface. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and I need to read some of your publications so I can really get caught up to speed. And I apologize to my audience for not sort of doing my homework. I've just been slammed. But now that we're kind of breaking ground here, let me have access to some of this stuff so I can really do a deep dive, do my homework, and next time you come on, we can kind of, get into it. I want to ask you something about the whole UFO phenomena, because I know, you touch on this. At least I've heard that you touch on this. So these craft, they come in, they come out, they make right angle turns, they defy our physics in ways that are incomprehensible. They move out of our atmosphere at like accelerated speeds, which again, we have nothing like it. 50 miles in 2 seconds, that would crush a normal human being.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, they're bending space and time, which is what I think they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
Oh, that's a interesting topic. We have our theories as field theories scientists. There's a couple categories. One is you have your defense contractors. So a lot of the objects, if they're special alloys, in certain designs, it's a dead giveaway. That's your military industrial complex.
Sure.
Back engine stuff. Right. And they're very advanced, and it's a separate department than like the United States Air Force, Navy, Marines. So one branch doesn't know the other exists. And that technology is maybe 100, 160 years more advanced than typical aviation or propulsion systems. So from that perspective, it might seem like it's outer planet or a different civilization. It isn't. But then there are some that are not from this source. So they'd be more of the plasma fields. And then they would be able to, they operate under different laws of physics, where you'd mentioned where a normal pilot would be crushed by the G-forces, or the frame structure of the craft couldn't take such dramatic angles or acceleration. That's because these are more of a plasma energy field, and they operate under a different physics. So then that would be the element that's not human. So you can get into debates. Is some of this of demonic origin, like say fallen angels, and then are there still good angels? Oh yeah, there are. So do they have vehicles and technologies? Yes. So you give it depend which ones are the good guys, which ones are the bad guys. A lot of times, when there's natural disasters, you'll see the technology used because they're surveying the damage. This isn't human to be from a non-human source, but they're surveying if there was a tsunami, hurricane, major earthquake. So we're definitely, there's more life than just humans on this blue planet called Earth.
Do you think there's life elsewhere in the universe, or do you think this is it? What are your thoughts there?
It depends how you answer that. If you want to use scriptural terms, Earth, this is a home planet for our particular DNA structure.
Right.
If the Genesis account mentions an Adam and an Eve, and a genetic code where there's quotations that let's make man in our image.
Right.
Well, there's a conversation going on there. Then we have a genetic footprint. We're carbon-based, and we have a genetic footprint through intelligent design. But it's possible that there was other genetic designs. Right, or before.
I think before.
Yeah, before Garden of Eden, because
Yes.
the perspective of Genesis, when Moses put it in paper and ink, it was verbal translation from family to family. Prior to that, when he put he used the term pen and pencil. It's a perspective from the Garden of Eden at a particular moment of time when our iteration was made. Let's make man in our image. It doesn't really get into, and maybe it's not important with the message of the scriptures, it didn't get into were there other iterations or other spirit entities that were engineers and had the ability to design genetic and what was outside the Garden of Eden, because there was life
We don't know.
outside. We don't know. The scriptures don't get into that, probably because it's not relevant, and the scriptures want you to concentrate on how do we get back to a perfect condition where we're spiritually in harmony with no sickness, aging, and death. We don't have that now. We lost it. Can we get back to it? So the scriptures tend to focus on that, but not the other players or what happened pre-Garden of Eden or what was outside of the Garden of Eden.
It's it's a good friend of mine, Mondo Gonzalez. He's a co-host of Prophecy Watchers, and Mondo is an amateur astronomer, but he's got great telescopes, and the whole project is called Psalm 19. Now, I'm the type of a guy. I mean, I look up, wave, and go about my business. It never really interested in me, but now with Mondo, he sends me all these, the Crab Nebulae, and I just sit there with my jaw on the ground. I had no idea. And no one knows where we are or what this is or how it got here. I mean, nobody knows. A lot of theories, the whole Big Bang thing, but that's just another theory. I think
Right. New theories.
he spoke it into existence. But this is something with all that, everything that's going on in the midst of all this. You got Avi Loeb and Three Eye Atlas, and Avi's downgraded it. But then you got all these other people from the New Agers are saying, no, this is it. We're being contacted. I've got downloaded information, channeled information from the Galactic Federation and all this. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on Atlas?
Well, on so many of the interviews that I've been on other shows and news programs, because you're bringing up a lot of each topic, we could spend an hour on each topic.
I'm aware of that. I know. I had a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, and I had a YouTube show for years that got yanked off the air, and I had over 400 videos that got removed during that 2021. So I got deplatformed and censored very heavily as a scientist.
Wow.
So there's years of material gone. But we have an anomaly in our solar system that's causing geological stresses on the Earth, but all the interior planets especially. It's not talked about in the news. It's an anomaly that most likely caused the conditions of the flood of Noah's day. It looks like it's been affecting the Earth since 2004, approximately 2004. You can't see it with a telescope. It's not a large object. It doesn't have to be with field theory understanding. It's cloaked, or say it's invisible from X-ray, visible light, infrared, radio telescope. Doesn't have any of those signatures, but it's an anomaly emitting a frequency far left of the long wave spectrum of our sun. And it's causing the core has been energized for over 20 years now, since 2004, and it's causing magma displacements. So our predictions have been very spot on as far as increased hurricane, typhoon activities, which are quakes, and landmass tornadoes. We're going to see continents eventually portions of continents will break apart and be below the ocean floor, new land masses arising. There's future Earth maps that you can see on the internet that kind of give guesstimations, but this is real. We're seeing a lot with what's happening with the oceans and the slowing or stalling of ocean currents. The power structure calls this climate change. They used to call it global warming in Al Gore's days. Those are that's a narrative that they're trying to follow and they have motives for that. That's not accurate. If we have climate change, it's not due to SUVs and having air conditioning.
I agree.
We're dealing with solar system harmonics, and this is matching conditions of Noah's day. Well, didn't Jesus mention that in the last days it'd be similar to Noah's day? People not taking any note, eating, drinking, marrying, being given in marriage, and then sudden destruction was upon them. So what happened in Noah's day? You had a handful that were spiritually attuned and survived a global reset. Jesus referred to that Armageddon, the last days of Great Tribulation, Armageddon, a global reset. Do people survive? Yes. The spiritually in tune survive, like Noah and his family. The majority, Jesus said, will not, because they're not taking any heed. Like in Noah's day, they're not taking any note. Well, the Earth and our solar system's been testifying, but everyone's watching sports and what's the Federal Reserve going to do, and how much is gold and Bitcoin. They're stuck in day-to-day material affairs, and they're not connected spiritually, and it's going right over their head.
I agree.
But the Earth is testifying. We're going to see the predictions we have. You won't be able to sleep at night. But that's not to be fearful. If there is fear, it should be fear to where it motivates you spiritually, that you better put that as a high priority and figure out what's going on and how to survive this. Because what's coming, you can't survive by having money, a bunker, stored food, bullets, and silver coins. That in the long term, that's not what it's going to take to survive what's coming. And I've talked for hours and hours and hours on other shows about this. And it creates some interest, but most people think it's very interesting. Then they go right back to their daily life and they forget my interviews.
Well, I just think, prophetically from Scripture, we are in the time of the end. In my opinion, there's no doubt. Those of you who come here on a daily basis, you know where I stand. I don't really need to reiterate it, but I think we're on some kind of countdown. I think we're very close to seeing something very drastic, traumatic, earth-changing, life-changing, and I think we're really close to it. I've been troubled I've said this on other shows, I've been troubled in my spirit for about 3 weeks now. And I can't, I don't know what it is, but I'm just troubled. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo. I get that. But I'm troubled. Not deeply troubled, but troubled. Something is coming. Your thoughts?
Well, we can tell you, and there'll have to be more interviews, but it's your show, whether you want me back or not.
Oh, I do. I can tell already. But I need.
You might get emails saying, who is this guy? Or you might have emails saying, have him on more. There's so much we want to know. But let me tell you that from a scientific standpoint, our group of scientists, we've been monitoring this for decades. We're not Johnny-come-latelys. We're very quiet. I'm the only one that does the interviews.
Well,
most don't, and I do very few interviews. So this is rare that I'm on your show. But it's all connected. And if you're talking about, not to put words in your mouth, spidey senses, the last 3 weeks, well, yeah, you better have that. And that's good that you have that, because you're picking up more than physical. You're picking up your other senses, the spiritual. If the things aren't right, of course they're not right. Let me tell you that the technologies of the medical industry, because the pharmaceutical industry, real quick, you probably already know this. I'm just repeating this, and your audience probably knows this. This goes back to Pharmakia. The oldest universities on planet Earth are the Egyptian universities of Pharmakia, that we get the pharmacy industry today.
Got it.
And remember when Moses and Aaron confronted the Pharaoh
There you go.
and the magic practicing priests threw down their staffs, turned into a snake, and then Aaron threw his, that scenario? You know what those practicing priests were in Egypt?
Well, they were the magicians, but they had all their power.
Yeah, you know what they were? They were pharmacists.
There you go.
They were graduates from the Egyptian School of Pharmacy, the School of Memphis, Tennessee. We can go on, that's a whole nother show. So what they're doing between the pharmaceutical industry and blockchain, tokenization in the blockchain, crypto tokenization, AI and robotics, it's all connected. The editing, the gene editing technology, the operating system of the pharmaceutical industry, of nanoparticulates. This is what I do for a living. I know all this stuff. So let me tell you, we're at a critical point. You mentioned earlier in the show. I'm just saying, if Jesus doesn't exist, and if we read about in the scriptures the last days, if that is not true, we're in serious trouble.
Big trouble. I agree.
Humans, because what's being accomplished today, what's being rolled out, mankind can't comprehend the technology and what the real plan is. And when I tell you, you won't be able to sleep at night, man is not going to fix this because we have non-human intelligence working with certain human agencies for this agenda. If we don't get outside non-human help, like in the heavenly realm, we are doomed as far as our DNA structure and what it means to be a human based on the those days are over. So when is this going to happen? If it doesn't happen, I'm telling you right now, on record, if this doesn't happen in the next 12 to 20 years, humanity as we know it no longer exists, is complete transhumanism, and mankind has been co-opted by different species.
I agree. And let me just say this, folks, that everything that you say, you're taking from a scientific viewpoint, but I have heard this before from all my studies with UFO whistleblowers and everything else. This is where we're going. You said 10 to 12 years. I shrink that down. I would say 5 to 10 years, max.
Try not to panic your audience.
I know. I get it. But we are on the board.
I'm just trying to be polite.
I get it. Weston, I'm sure you've seen this in the last week. It was all over the internet. Now they have the first AI actress, and she's being hired out. She's getting film roles, and you can't tell. I mean, I saw a clip. You can't tell. I have no idea. But this is where we are. So he's got to come back. You talk about outside help, because human beings can't fix this. Let me just weigh in here real quick. Human beings can't fix what's going on. We need the Son of God. We need Jesus to come back with the armies of heaven. It's the only way this thing's ever going to get righted. And we know from Scripture that that's what happens. The question is, how much are we going to see before he returns? I'll give you the last word. Got to have you back. Thank you so much, Weston. And tell the folks how they get a hold of you, please.
The next 6 years, I'll break it down. Next 6 years are going to be extremely stressful to all of us on this planet. We have solar system harmonics because we think what's happening in our solar system, like it did in Noah's day, is controlled. This isn't by accident. Okay? So in Noah's day, those events were controlled by the heavenly realm.
Right.
Let's say the good guys.
Right.
That the same physics are back in our solar system. Why? Well, it fits in with the last days of the scriptures.
Amen.
Look at human behavior. In 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, the breakdown of family, society, all the pieces of the puzzle are fitting. Next 6 years, lots going to happen as far as geology of the earth, stresses of the earth, human behavior, people getting more animalistic, more violent. A spiritual community is going to be extremely important. And we can't get away collectively, we can't get away sitting on the fence anymore. You're either going to have to make a spiritual stand and advance spiritually, or be a physical person and see how that goes. If you just stay in the physical realm. But my company, the website, you could, I don't know if I would give that, but the email is westonscientific@gmail.com. And Weston Scientific is my company name, where we have the technologies I worked on with the cold plasma. We also have technologies that we're not able to research in the United States. We have a prototype of functioning med bed, which would be another interesting, how that works with frequencies and healing organs, and when you're dealing with diseases in the body, and structured water. I'm one of the world's experts on energizing structural water. We're able to change the bond angle, the hydrogen, and energize water, and it takes on different physics property. And that's kind of what Jesus did in the scriptures when he altered turning water into wine, walking on water.
Right.
So there's a lot of science behind that. We broke through with technologies, understanding how to manipulate the water molecule. It's phenomenal what we're able to do in my company and our group of research scientists.
Weston, I can't thank you enough. Folks, this is just the first of, I would say, many interviews. It's not often I have a guest that's like this, and you gotta, we'll converse via email, but I need to bone up and do my homework. So when you come back, I can ask you some very poignant and pithy questions, if I can use that verbiage. Folks, before I bring Dr. Lynn, I'm just going to call her Heather because it's. Can I call you Heather?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just going to call her Heather. So, before I bring her on, for members only, for a little under $10 a month, you can become a member. You get all sorts of members only content, 10% off everything in our store. There's 33 films, lots of books, 15 books. Number 15 is coming out soon. And, plus you get members only content. So, time is of the essence here, and I want to get right into it. First of all, Heather, thanks so much for coming on the record.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak to you.
I want to, towards the end of the book, you started to bag on the present day archaeological community. And I'm going, yeah, go get him. Because I'm right there with you. The idea that, the class, day one in class, these people are pseudo-archaeologists. I can't tell you how many times I've been called a pseudo-archaeologist. And you can see the elongated skulls in the back. So I'm a pseudo-archaeologist because we actually do DNA testing of 58 different samples and then 3 different labs. And somehow that's being a pseudoscientist. It's just like, speak to that. Why is it just this sort of like a closed circle and a good old boy network in mainstream archaeology? Let's start there.
Well, it certainly is, and it has been for probably the beginning of it, really. It started off as being an antiquarian society. It was a hobby of the gentry because they were the only ones who had the finances to go out and do these excavations in a time where, travel was more difficult and expensive.
Sure.
And so it started as people literally just going and looting and discovering and bringing it home to their mansions and putting it in their cabinet of curiosities and having friends come over and take a look at it. And so over time, a lot of the social structures and class structures started to crumble, and people were really offended by this. And part of the thing that I think they started to do was try to legitimize their work. First of all, they recognized that this was coming. There was a changing tide, especially after World War I. And this happened everywhere, but mostly in Britain. I would say that the real beginnings of this transformation from just a hobby club to something more legitimate happened. And so they started having public access to some of their findings. They started opening museums and libraries to the public, which not many had been before. And so they started to utilize new scientific tools and kind of started putting it under this guise of science. And it is a science. But it is a soft science or a social science, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's sort of this effort to, I would say, whitewash it a bit to make it so that what they are doing is quantifiable when really, in fact, a lot of it is still just qualitative measurements. It's opinions. It's discussion based. There's only so much. Now we can do a lot more with hard science tools. But when this started, there was pretty limited. So this effort to sort of scientize it more fully and align it with the hard scientists was just a way to legitimize the field more. And whether that's good or bad is not here nor there. But what's happened is it's given this layer of dogma to it so that the mainstream, we'll call them archaeologists, look at it like, well, this is our findings and that's pretty much it. So it's an authority thing. But in any soft science discipline, as you know, there's different lenses you could interpret things under.
Sure.
There's different, and how can we ultimately prove some of those phenomenological things? And so I think that because of the unfortunate underlying there's black markets involved. There's a lot of funny business. There's even now, even probably more so, I think because of all of those conflicted interests, it's one of those old boys club things still to this day. And that's what I found when I was getting into I think it was like literally archaeology 101. We didn't get through the book. It was like day one where they were saying, well, we should debunk these individuals. And I was just, okay, sure. But I recognized some of the names. One was Michael Crema, or was somebody that I had followed a little bit and heard on the radio. And so I thought, well, it's a little strange because I don't know really how to properly debunk, but they weren't worried about that. And then getting involved in the American Anthropological Association and having it outright told to us, here are the tools to use to try to argue against pseudo-archaeology. And it's just overt and it's unfortunate. But I will say, I think it's so much better now. I mean, in this time that I've been in it, you had to really hide a lot of thoughts. Now it's getting better. It's getting a little better. I think more people are waking up and taking back the whole thing. I think people are not trusting institutions, which, that's good and bad. But at the end of the day, we're maybe digging more for the truth than we had in the past.
I have been labeled a pseudoscientist and a pseudo-archaeologist. I know you have too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like I wear the badge proudly.
Yep.
But I've been in places like in Peru with Brian Forrester, and then on our own without Brian. But Brian was and Senior Juan, who's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But you were down in Peru. I remember there was this one grave site that Senior Juan and Senior Salvatore took us to. And I think Brian had been there maybe one time. That was it. And it was a killing field. It was a killing field. A mass grave. Mass graves. We counted 60 elongated skulls with blunt force trauma so you have a right-hand guy with a war club hitting a man. So you had the left-hand side of a skull completely smashed in. I had someone from a well-known university, a forensic anthropologist, set up to fly down. I'm paying for everything, paying for his flight, the whole deal, because they were putting a road through this area. And I knew that this is it. If we don't do something and record this and do rescue archaeology, all of this will be lost. And at the last minute, a week before we were ready to go, he chickened out because it was too off the wall. He was afraid of, and this is what, I've run up against this over and over and over again. People are afraid to come forward, and people in academia are afraid to come forward and go up against the prevailing paradigm. So let's circle into the book because, again, this is really a fun read. Who are the Anunnaki, and why does it matter now? And before that, you answer that question, there was rabbit trail number 2015 and counting. I recently watched a podcast where this gentleman and a woman were talking about that 3-Eye Atlas was the return of the Anunnaki, and I did a rebuttal on that, and I just said, we don't know what 3-Eye Atlas, it may be, I don't know, but right now we don't know what this thing is. So that's hyperbole, and we don't engage in that. But the Anunnaki are a real deal. I have a slightly different interpretation maybe than you do. We can talk about that. But who are they, in your opinion?
When I first wrote the book, I really had no idea other than just the mainstream view of it, which was they were these gods from the Sumerians and Mesopotamians overall. And it wasn't until I started looking into an excavation that happened about 10 years ago, I want to say, into Ur. And this was after many years of people not being able to excavate there. And there was a little press release that came out that said, British archaeologists are partnered to go out there and all this research is getting done. And it was so exciting. And so a lot of the people on my Facebook were asking about it. And I thought, well, let me reach out to the professor who was in charge at the University of Manchester and just see if I could get more information. It was really hard to find information online other than this generic press release that had been sent out on the wire to all the news sources. So the school was pretty fine about it and said, well, can you just submit the questions ahead of time? And I'm like, sure. And I go on to my blog or social media at the time and I said, hey, I have a little meeting scheduled. So anybody have any questions that I could pass on to the lead archaeologist? And some of that had to do with the Anunnaki. And I thought, well, why not? Right. So I put those questions in there and I wrote a little report on that. I think it's available for free on my site somewhere, but I outlined the email so that people could see the questions so that it wasn't too bonkers or anything. And it was quite respectful. We were professionals. And I thought nothing wrong here, but I was ghosted completely. And so I thought, well, that's weird. And then I had an email come to me from a local who was pleading for my help, saying they were taking a bunch of artifacts out of there, but they said there were bags and bags of tablets. And I thought, I don't know what you want me to do because I think it was just because I had this blog at the time. But I thought, what is going on? And so I started looking into it more and more, and I couldn't find much. So I started to follow the money, of course, as one would. And I started to see that the funding was really strange, something that I hadn't expected, which was ultimately a big oil. So a petroleum company in the United States was funding it. An individual from the Thyssen family dynasty, so Baron von Thyssen, and he was notable because his holding at the time was second only to Queen Elizabeth, and so he was a collector of all these antiquities, specifically ones in Mesopotamia, from Mesopotamia, that is. So all these individuals had a conflict of interest, I would say, and not a lot of transparency. And then I did discover the field reports actually were given behind closed doors in the company. So it was like the corporate level, and then they would trickle down into the university, and it just seemed very odd to me. And so, of course, I just kept digging, so to speak. And I thought, well, what is this? Why? I knew about Sitchin a little bit, and I knew, of course, about stargates. And I was always kind of interested in out there theories, but I don't want to call myself a skeptic because that's a little harsh. I'm not always looking for things to debunk. I'm really genuinely just curious, but I don't believe a lot. There's a Nietzsche quote of there are two different types of people in the world: those who want to know and those who want to believe. And we have that very famous "I want to believe" poster from the X-Files, and so I get it, but I kind of want to know rather than just believe. And so that's the approach that I took. And I studied the Anunnaki a little more, studied the Sitchin stuff, and it ended up culminating in this particular book, The Anunnaki Connection, because I started to see a lot of strange connections. And so the unfortunate part about the book, in my opinion, is that I was hashing it out as I was going, trying to figure out who are these individuals, or because I was so relatively new to all of the other ideas about them. That's how I presented the book, as maybe more of a journey and an overview for people who maybe aren't as familiar with things other than the two camps that existed at the time, which one was Zecharia Sitchin, of course, and then the alternative, which was Dr. Michael Heiser. And these were great figures, but it led, because of their polar opposition to each other, it's led even now to like a cult of personality. So you'll get people who they just look at Sitchin as dogma. And if you say, well, I don't think this is right, oh, then you'll believe, and then you're discounted. So you can come across and to find yourself in a situation where you could be like denounced by academia, but then denounced by the fringe. So it's a little like they're kind of doing the same thing. And so I was not for that. So I kept pushing, and I thought, let me look at all these different narratives. And it wasn't until about the end of the book, because it was a journey, that I started to think, I think I have an idea that I'd rather explore. Maybe an idea that's not Sitchin-esque and not as harsh as maybe what Michael Heiser pushed back on. Although I do think both of them, they just really were coming at something, but from different angles. And so it ended up, I guess, being when it was stereotypical, I had more questions than answers in the end. And that's what led me to my new book coming out in February, which is Anunnaki Revelation. And that's where I kind of laid down exactly, at least where I am now, about my thoughts about who or what the Anunnaki were. So it's not an easy answer, and I'm not going to claim that I have the answer. I'm just going to say at this point in my study, I do think that the Anunnaki themselves, I think there's two things to differentiate that I find kind of important, and I don't know that a lot of people really point to it a lot. There's the Anunnaki, and if you Google that, say, you'll see all kinds of different images, and some of them are like birdmen and these bears. And then there's the Apkallu. They're two different types of beings. And a lot of times the Apkallu are presented as Anunnaki. Well, looking more into the Apkallu, it starts to really get strange. So, looking into the Anunnaki, it is my view that, for one thing, I'll just say I don't believe that these are aliens that are coming in 1960s nuts and bolts spaceships because they need to mine gold, etc.
Yeah,
I don't believe that.
I don't. Right.
I just and that does not suggest that Sitchin didn't have some great points. It's just to simply say that is not. I don't find enough evidence for that. And I'm looking mostly at what the Sumerians themselves said, because we have tons of text from them. Many haven't been translated, but we have more cuneiform tablets than we do Egyptian papyri because they were made of clay and they lasted. So there's so much to learn still. And so in that, we can just ask them, who were these people or things or beings or whatever they are? And you hear a lot about the cataclysm, the 12,500 year ago Younger Dryas impact event,
Right.
global flood. So something that I tend to think is that you have areas where there are semi-settled hunter-gatherers, and this is in the archaeological record. This is not disputed. And then you have individuals or beings that arrive, and they arrive to this area, and they are not described as looking the same as the individuals who are already there. They refer to the people who are already there as the, quote, black-headed ones. So that would imply they have dark hair, but it could also then imply that the ones who were coming did not have dark hair. So it just means that there's some different feature about them and that they thought of themselves as separate. So you get to this whole thing about what they were doing, like subjugation and farming, but also teaching them the arts and the sciences and this sort of thing. But they're not very godly. They're very oppressive. They're not nice. Let's just say that. I always joke that you don't go around seeing people with like a "What would Jesus do" bracelet. They don't have like a "What would Anki do" bracelet, nor would they have a "What would Zeus do," because these were not
Right.
moral gods. And so over time, it does appear that they're very human in the way they behave. And then there's also this almost bestowing of a position onto the kings. Like later in the kings list, you see that they're given a sage. So there's a king, and then they're assigned, or somehow there's this associated sage. And these sages are a little different than the Anunnaki themselves. They refer to those Apkallu again. When you look into those sages, it's when there is a question about, well, are the Anunnaki from Earth or wherever, you could still kind of hammer that out. But specifically, the Apkallu are referenced as being from the Pleiadian star system. They're also referenced as being semi-biological entities, and they can sort of shapeshift. And they also come out of oceans.
Mm.
And they impart wisdom onto the Anunnaki, and through the Anunnaki, also individuals. And they're very archaic. They're like pre-flood even. They're kind of just this strange thing that later are known as genie or then jinn. And then we start seeing these connections, of course, with birdmen, so to speak.
Right.
Connections to things like jinn, or even I would go so far as to say demons, if you were to follow the etymology. So I'm not trying to make a leap of like moral judgment. I'm just simply saying the etymology of it would suggest that these entities were sort of like daemons or demons or some sort of weird messenger, semi-biological entity that was more celestial and otherworldly. So then when you follow that, it starts to open up a whole new narrative. And so I can't say indefinitely that the Anunnaki are not from a different place, so to speak. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they are just simply regular people. I think personally that they are very tall individuals, very different individuals that came from a pre-flood civilization and brought and dispersed and met with the hunter-gatherers that were semi-settled in different regions. And with them came they brought their sort of, we'll call it a religion, their belief set that involved all these different practices that could be questionable now. Things like orgiastic behavior, psychoactive substances, but all in the service of these, what they refer to as otherworldly and semi-biological entities that are very, very, I would say, very similar to the things that people describe in the alien context now. So, and it's a lot. So it's a little bit, it's not as easy as saying like, no, the Anunnaki were aliens or they were demons. But there's a lot there to suggest that something big was going on, and they weren't simply people, but they weren't also just like aliens that came down.
It's interesting how in the last 50 years, no one, the whole idea of the Younger Dryas period, it really wasn't talked about until recently, basically. But, the biblical narrative talked about this global flood. Critics would go, well, it really didn't happen. Then you get the people in my camp that are saying, oh, it's only a 6,000-year-old span. And they try to shoehorn everything into the 6,000 year. Well, if we go back, if the Younger Dryas is true, and I think it is, I think most scholars would agree that that whole flood was a global flood, that we're only 6,000 years apart, which is nothing really when you think about it. And then you get this explosion of knowledge. And the question is, I've been in a lot of different places, and I have seen what I would call pre-flood architecture, specifically in Peru, which it's never been duplicated. I mean, archaeologists can jump up and down, just show me how you build Sacsayhuaman, how you put megalithic stones like that, polygonal shapes. And, other people have talked about this, but it's not like they discovered it. It's been sitting here for thousands of years. Something cataclysmic happened. And I would say it's the flood that we read about, which seems to be global. I look at all this with the Anunnaki, and I just, and you talked about in your book, I just plug in the Book of Enoch to it, because to me, it just solves the mystery. It's like, oh, I get it. These fallen angels are coming down, mixing the sea, creating hybrid entities known as the Nephilim. And, the rest is sort of history. You referenced the Book of Enoch. Let me just read this. This is page 251. There are the seven sages, or Apkallu, the archons of the Gnostics, the serpent gods of the Far East and Central America, the titans of the Greeks, the snake brothers of the Hopi, the jinn of Islam, the demons of Christianity, and the Elohim of the Old Testament. They are the watchers, and they are still here. I found that, and I think I don't really know your belief system, but after reading that, I said, well, we're kind of on the same page here, because I'm looking at all this, and you can. The late Chuck Missler equated the Titans of Greek mythos back into the Nephilim and the fallen angels coming down and doing all that. What are your thoughts on that?
I would stand by that for sure. And I think that the Anunnaki, the term, because you're looking at the not just one set of texts, you're looking at texts over time. And I think what ends up happening is the original text that referenced the Anunnaki are very clear and point to these ideas. But then over time, once it is spoken about in like Assyrian and Babylonian, you see a difference in the Anunnaki, the way it's referenced, and particularly their association with kings. And it's my belief that it's because in their language, they started using the term to denote somebody in leadership. So like we would say Lord, there's Lord, the Lord, and then there is the landlord or a lord of a manor. And we just sort of throw that around. I feel like that might explain what happens over hundreds and thousands of years, even after the Mesopotamian city-states sort of change, and there's a lot of different upheaval. And even though the Anunnaki mythos stays, it just changes. And so I think to find the truth, so to speak, or at least the origin of it, is to go to the actual Sumerian and not the later Babylonian. I mean, that helps, and that's very important. But I think to go as far back as we can, we start to see the less polluted or the less changed. And then it does point to that more of a what I said at the last page. It's these fallen angels, this sort of thing. But the Anunnaki then were still there. They were practicing these sage-like rites and rituals much later. But I think it just became part of like their vernacular and their tradition, just like cuneiform stayed around as like the language of commerce and that sort of thing. So I think the answer lies in actual Sumerian. And I think that it is associated with Enoch. I think these stories are all pointing to the same event, and it's deeply tied into the flood so-called mythos. I mean, happen to think that this is not a myth, but I also don't think myths are untrue. I think that when you call something a myth, it's not the same as saying it's true. It's a different type of true. There's myths, and they're not factual necessarily. They may contain facts, but they can contain a much deeper, more important truth. And so, it's not disparaging, in my view, to call it a myth. But in any case, I think there's a lot of truth to what happened, and it's been kept in different traditions in various forms for a long time because it was so important. Abraham Hancock talks about that we're a species with amnesia.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe that to be the case, but I also think we're a species with shared trauma. I think we've been traumatized, and we carry these remnants of going through something as terrible as a flood like that. And so it is very important for us to keep telling those stories and keep them alive, because we're trying to, I think, warn everybody at the end that, hey, this could happen again, or watch out for this, like the Joseph Campbell hero with 1,000 faces, the monomyth. A lot of times, just generally speaking, in a sense of like how people work out trauma psychologically, they go through cycles. You'll hear cycles of abuse or whatever. It's like you keep doing the same things and hope that you'll get a different result, and maybe something will be good and you'll have closure. Well, it's like that on this huge existential level with humanity. We keep telling the monomyth. We kept telling these same stories in different ways. And I think that's because we're all trying to work out that shared trauma of being displaced, going through a huge flood, being afraid of what beings may have, we may have come encounter with. I think that we're working that out. I think somewhere deep in our hearts, we know. And that's where the subconscious is always trying to explain that to us somehow in stories and myths.
Your very last line, they are the watchers and they are still here. I read that, about fell out of my chair. I go, oh my gosh, we're on the same page. I believe that the whole UFO phenomena is who was here thousands of years ago, and they've never left, and they're doing the same thing. Interesting. There's a prophecy in Daniel. I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but in Daniel 2:43 it says, "Their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not cleave to them." The word "cleave" is the word that we get for marriage. Thank you, Jim Williamson, who revealed that in his book. So there's no marriage contract, which is exactly what we see with the abduction phenomena, the so-called breeding program. And it just makes me wonder, there's echoes of that in the Sumerian texts. There's some sort of a hybrid being created. What are we looking at here? It's so strange. And you say, the watchers have never left. They're still here. I completely concur with that. And they're working overtime. From my research, it's very. I think let me sum it up by saying this. I think there's a very nefarious agenda going on here. Would you agree, or do you see any benevolence?
Agree with that.
Okay,
I would agree. There's these. So when I first wrote the book, I didn't know there would be an agenda or not. I was just very interested in finding out what's going on. But it's been a while, and I've had many experiences since then. Many different things happen and different research, and I'm always trying to stay objective. And you asked what my belief system was. I was raised Catholic, and I would still consider myself Catholic, though I always have to qualify that with. That doesn't mean I endorse everything that's going on in that faith. But in terms of, where I'm at culturally, I'm more Catholic, but I would consider myself a Christian Catholic without a true home. But so that's where I'm at. But I try to take a very objective view of it, maybe more of a scientific view, but still open-minded, right? And I've done that for a long time. And it wasn't until probably the past, while writing the Anunnaki Revelation and about the past 2 years, that it really just hit me hard. I went through a lot of different things and basically experienced absolute spiritual attack like you would never believe, like I would never believe, at least.
I went there with you. Oh yeah.
It was unreal. I faced it a little bit before in the past with the writing of a different book that I did, Evil Archaeology, but I kind of thought, "Oh, that's just me being superstitious perhaps." But this was different. This was a next level experience. And I realized that, somebody told me about that little parable that you might be familiar with, which is about the devil owning the fence. So, you perch yourself on a fence post and you're looking in on the left-hand side. There's the devil and all of his minions and people and whatnot. And then on the right-hand side, there's God. And here's kind of looking at this. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to stay above that and look and understand. And then over time, the devil leaves and God leaves with his people. And the devil says, well, what are you doing? Come on. And I'm like, I'm not on your side. He says, I own the fence. So it's like, if you don't choose a side, you are choosing a side.
That's true.
And I never thought of it as choosing a side. I'm literally trying to just be objective, observe the situation. But it can send a different message sometimes. And it's very important to try to be firm about that. Otherwise, people and entities, if you will, can get the wrong impression. And you can open yourself up, I think, to spiritual attack. At least I know you can open yourself up to spiritual attack. But in terms of the watchers and where they are, I think they've always been here. I think this
I
is,
agree.
they've always been here. I look at them as, I like to refer to them as ultra-terrestrial, because extraterrestrial is just still so limiting, and it implies so much baggage too from, again, spaceships and this sort of thing, which
Right.
again, well, and that doesn't mean that there's not signs in the sky, but it does carry a lot of baggage when you say just aliens or extraterrestrials. So I think that ultra-terrestrial, for me, describes them a little better. But no, I think they're definitely a force now. And I think that we're watching what happens in the world today as that force is getting stronger.
Interesting. Very interesting. I don't want to keep you, and I don't want to give away the whole book. Folks, you need
It's
to.
fine.
Need
We'll give it all away and keep me as long as you want.
the book is very, very interesting. And, it's so you mentioned Immanuel Velikovsky in the book. And I remember reading Velikovsky because I was raised Catholic like you. And then I left the church at 13 and then became completely ensconced in New Age Eastern mysticism. And that was it until I was 30. Then I had the Paul on the Road to Damascus experience, became born again, spirit filled, and that's 45 years ago. My life has never been the same. But I'm about 18 or 19 years old, and I get this book, Worlds in Collision, Earths in Upheaval, Immanuel Velikovsky. I'm going, this is it. He's figured it out. I mean, it was just so exciting because, wow, this guy is connecting dots, which, and of course, he's a pseudoscientist now, right?
Right. They all are.
Right, yeah, they all are. Anybody who doesn't agree with the paradigm that we endorse is a pseudo. But I mean, he's talking about the flood. Why is it that they're caves with this jumble of animal bones and everything else in there that shouldn't be there? So, going back to his research and something came in and it was a pole shift. And I mean, all that is certainly more than plausible. I think something incredibly cataclysmic happened and I think it was a global flood. And, I mean, it's bizarre when you think about it. And let me get you, this is sort of not, you didn't address this, but could the clock be messed up because let's say there was a pole shift, number one. If there was a pole shift, then could time as we know it somehow have been altered? So where people go, oh, that's 12,000 years. Well, by our clock, it's actually a lot less than that. I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts
But
on it?
I think that's possible too, and especially considering like the precession of the equinox, you do see changes in the sky with astroarchaeology. You can see how the particular very ancient monuments were built to face particular
Right.
areas, and then you see variations and changes. So definitely that could be a thing, and then also just the practical consideration that when we talk about calendar years and time. Well, I mean, we have the sun, and so we know how we can calculate that with a 24-hour period. But at the same time, there's a political edge to that where you have different types of calendars, different types of people deciding. And there are some conspiracies about this and everything, but sometimes there could be missing time even where how we know we're sure
Yeah.
if we're on the exact timeline in the same way that we and the ancients understood, or are we fully aligned? And so there's I'm not going to say, yeah, and this is how much time we're missing, but I would say it's definitely worth not feeling as though we just have it all figured out and this is the actual time we're in right now, period.
Yeah,
I think it's questionable.
something else. Have you ever read G.H. Pember's book, Earth's Earliest Ages? Have you ever?
No, that sounds great though.
I'd ordered it again. It burned in the fire. We lost everything in the 2018 fire. So I ordered it. It's coming in today. And I've read it already 2 or 3 times in the last 30 years. Anyway, I'm reading it again because it's something we get this much of the picture, and the picture's like really big, and we see this much, and we're all trying to figure out our origins. So that leads me to my next question. Have you been following what may lie beneath the Giza Plateau? Have you heard about that? And follow it?
Yeah, I have.
Your thoughts?
And I think that I think it's interesting that it was sort of foretold. I mean, we have like the sleeping prophet. I don't know how you feel about like Edgar Cayce and that sort of thing, but there have been people for a long time suggesting that something was there. And I also think it's very interesting that there's even controversy around that. But I'm not surprised because archaeology is inherently destructive. And so people don't want to destroy anything. But at the same time, it's very convenient as well to then not do what's necessary to really fully look. And there could be a number of reasons for why, but none of them are good. They're all nefarious in my view, especially after researching the depths of Sumerian archaeology and what's happened there. I know, if you've seen the wristwatches of the gods, people will call those things wristwatches and say that they were timepieces, but I actually was able to find the actual wristwatches, so to speak. And they are cuffs. They're gold cuffs. They're beautiful. They have a big eye in the middle. They show this like poppy rite that has one of the Apkallu who's anointing the king. Very interesting, intricate piece. But what's probably more interesting about it is the fact that it was discovered in a huge gold hoard and lost. And this gold hoard that was found in Mesopotamia was the second largest, or possibly the largest, since King Tut's tomb.
Wow.
And we don't hear a lot about that.
I know. I've not heard about that. No.
Yes, so look at it. It was kings and queens and just tons. And it's been cataloged, and so there are pictures available, but then disappeared. A lot of it's been looted, gone, disappeared. And there was one archaeologist in particular who was a local there who discovered this, and he was a professor, and he did all the things he needed to do. He went right to work and took pictures. He could speak English as well, and so he did 2 different versions of the work. A lot of the work is available at the University of Chicago, but it's in a book that's very expensive and very held and just kind of not easy to necessarily come across. And so there is this level of just corruption all around.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and so with Egypt, given its state politically and with tourism and all the different interests in it, it's hard to say exactly what the motive would be, but it could be 10 different motives, but I believe they're all just not great motives to keep that from us.
You mentioned Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, and I've always believed that he had what I would call a familiar spirit. And so he can get some, and we're told, not to do that because you're taking something in you and you don't know,
Right.
whether it's benevolent or malevolent. So, and before I became a Christian, I read Casey's stuff. I mean, I know about it, the whole knowledge between the Sphinx and the pause and all this, the ancient wisdom. But, I have a completely different view. That to me is mediumship. And we're told, not to engage in that because you're letting something in that you don't want. But, I think that if the data holds, because they've been flying, these satellites over Giza Plateau, if the data holds, then we're looking at a world which is prehistoric. And I would call it fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture. That's my little, label to put on this thing. I think there was a grid system that covered the planet. I'm gonna just give you one more thing, and then I'm gonna let you go because we've been on for 43 minutes, and I try to keep these things pithy, but we have gone over the pithiness, if that's even.
That's a big topic.
Yeah, it's a big. Well, it's huge. We've scratched the surface, but there's a site. You may know about this, you may not know about it. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think you'll find this interesting. And I'm going to send you a private link so you can watch the film if you want to watch it. There's a site called America Stonehenge.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so about the Standing Stone, right? And then here's the summer solstice standing stone. Here's the center of the henge. When you look at that and you draw a line on Google Earth, that splits the two trilithons in Stonehenge, England, thousands of miles apart. And you can't do that. That's spherical trigonometry. You've got to be in the air to do it. And it ain't a coinkydink. I mean, it's real. We discovered some other things, which we're working on a film on this. I'll tell you privately if you're interested. The same type of a connection. So, I mean, there seems to be a grid system that was there that was destroyed by some cataclysm, i.e., the flood. In my opinion, your closing thoughts, and before you go, please tell our audience how we can get your book, please. Thank you.
You can get the book anywhere books are sold, really. You can look at my website, www.drheatherlynn.com. It's drheatherlynn.com. But Amazon, you can always go there. And everywhere. But anyone who wants to reach out to, I welcome emails and suggestions and leads as well, because I'm still also trying to figure all this out myself.
So before I roll the interview with JB, and it's always good to be on his show, he's become a friend in the last couple of years. He's at the same conferences with Prophecy Watchers, and just a great guy. That's a great guy. And it's an honor to be on his show. But you know what, folks? We've got some specials coming up for members only, 50% off everything in the store. It's a great deal. Basically wholesale prices, just for members only. So think about that. Think about becoming a member. Right next to the subscribe button is a join. That's how you do it. So for a little less than $10 a month, you become a member. You get content for members only. Number one, you get 10% off everything in the store and our monthly news magazine. But you also get these little perks. That's why we're going to do this Black Friday, 50% off to the 20th of December, everything in the store. So pretty cool deal. But thank you for coming here. We're getting close to 261,000 subscribers. A lot of you come here every day. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you for just showing up and watching what we do. We do a show every single day, so don't wait for YouTube to send you a message saying, hey, there's a new show. We're here every day because so much is going on. Anyway, folks, here's the J.B. Hickson interview.
Thanks for joining us. It's going to be a great day today. We've got L.A. Marzulli joining us for the program today. He is one of a kind. I mean, just such a great friend, a great guy. I've had the chance to interact with him quite a bit. He's one of the handful of guests that I really followed and looked up to and admired for a number of years before I ever had the chance to meet him. You know, I heard him at different conferences. I heard him on Coast to Coast AM. And of course, he was one of those guys that I thought, wow, man, he's famous. I'll never get the chance to meet him. But sure enough, as God's providence unfolded and NBW Ministries started expanding and doing several shows per week. Now we do one every day. And if you count Sundays, it's 7 per week. And anyway, the Lord allowed our paths to cross, and I really enjoy him. You know, he's unique in that he's not your stereotypical academic theologian or your stereotypical Bible prophecy guy who's out there giving you 20 proofs for the pre-trib rapture. You know, we get a lot of that. I that's kind of my world, frankly. But I kind of have a foot in both worlds. One is the sort of the theological, systematic theology world from my academic background, but also sort of the conspiracy theory world, as you well know, with my deep dive research over the last 20 years. But that's where L.A. and I intersect, and he's been carving out new territory for many years in the realm of high strangeness. And high strangeness, that's a term I think that was first coined back in the ufology days of Project Blue Book. Boy, the name escapes me. It'll come to me. But anyway, I think it was oh boy, it just escapes me. Anyway, one of the great ufologists, L.A. may know, but whether he knows the origin of the term or not, he certainly is an expert in high strangeness. And we're going to talk with him today. Looking forward to a great show together. A couple of quick reminders, though, before we bring on L.A. We've got our Substack is just growing by leaps and bounds. I just had no idea that, kind of having a presence on Substack would reach a whole new audience. And it is. I know many of you subscribe to Substack, but you already are on our app, or you're already listening on, Rumble or Apple or Spotify or some of the many other outlets, Apple TV, Roku, so forth and so on. But a lot of our Substack audience is new to NBW. Praise God for that. It's just a chance to help believers, a whole new set of believers, grow in their faith and, of course, reach the unreached, those who don't know the Lord, with the gospel, the good news that Christ died for our sins and rose from the dead. We're coming up on Thanksgiving and coming up right on the heels of that upon Christmas, if the Lord tarries. My favorite time of year, honestly. I just love the holidays. I love just reflecting on the goodness of the Lord and all that we have to be thankful for. I was talking to someone recently, and they reminded me that, even if you're struggling with some difficulties in life, and frankly, who isn't, right? It's just a matter of degree. We always should be thankful in all things, giving thanks in all things, as Paul tells us. And so I want to encourage you to do that. We'll have more to say about Thanksgiving as we get a little bit closer. We're still a couple of weeks away, but just a great time of year. And, just appreciate you guys as our audience so much for your support, for your prayers. I feel like anytime I need to, I can post a prayer, sometimes anonymously, on our prayer board at the NBW Ministries website or app. And it's just great to have you along. So join us on Substack, even if you're already following us on some of the other social media outlets. Substack is a unique one. And by the way, I do write at least once a week. I post an article in addition to our daily videos. So that's some new content that's, you can find it if you look in certain places on our website or our app, but it's kind of nice once a week to have this article posted for you right there for you to read. So check out Substack. Special thanks to our friend Joe Hawkins for his help in suggesting that and helping us carve out a presence there on Substack. We got lots of great resources at the Not by Works online store, something for everybody, really. And this time of year, I always like to remind people, even if you've already purchased some of my books or some of the other books that we sell on our site, or some of the other resources, some of the streaming video content, those types of things, even if you've already purchased those for yourself, they make great gifts. If you've got someone who's maybe either a believer who's still a little bit asleep at the wheel as it relates to the Luciferian conspiracy, or maybe an unbeliever, especially in your world, a friend or family member, maybe give them a copy of Spirit of the Antichrist, Volume 1, that has something in there that will most certainly pique just about anybody's interest. And as they're drawn into talking about some of those just lies that we've been told, it'll also introduce them to spiritual things and the reality of the gospel and the good news of salvation in Christ. So check it out on the online store. All right, our verse for the day before we bring on L.A. Marzulli. No telling where the conversation will go with L.A. Just a great friend. And, I don't think I need to say this, but every now and then it's helpful to remind our audience, especially because we pick up new members. We have a wide variety of guests, and I don't agree with all of my guests on every minutia of doctrine at all. I mean, we have people that we have on that aren't even pre-trib sometimes. L.A. Marzulli, of course, is, but so this isn't about him. I'm just reminding you because he's just such a unique and sort of exciting guest. I get a little bit excited when I have him on. So we have academics on, we have experts in various fields, we have technology experts, we got Grandpa Randy, we got Shane, we got all kinds of experts. And I don't have a litmus test that you must agree with me on every premillennial, dispensational, pre-tribulational facet of doctrine. I love reaching out to new guests who have a new audience that they'll replay our post or share our link after they're on the show with their audience. And it's just a chance for me to share the gospel with even more people. So for those of you that maybe are used to, different types of guests, listen, LA is one of our favorites, and you're going to love this show today. But our verse for the day comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, talking about that future time when the Lord comes back to take the throne and inaugurate the long-awaited kingdom of righteousness. And it says in Isaiah 2, verses 20 and 21, "In that day a man will cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each for himself to worship, to the moles and bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the crags of the rugged rocks." In other words, they'll throw all these idols away, just toss them away into caves and crags of the rocks from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake the earth mightily. I tell you what, there's a lot of idols out there right now. Even many believers have idols. Anything you put as a higher priority before the Lord than the Lord, then that's an idol. But certainly the world and its system has built numbers of idols. What a day it will be when there are no more idols. Everyone, from the least to the greatest, will know about the Lord, will come up to Jerusalem, will worship him, and we will experience the promise to Abraham of that long-awaited global kingdom of peace, righteousness, and justice. I hope that encourages you today. We're not there yet, but Lord willing, it won't be long. Amen. All right, well, let's bring on our guest now, my good friend L.A. Marzulli. Well, L.A., good to see you, my friend. How have you been?
I'm doing okay, JB. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Now, we were not too long ago, we were connected there in Norman in October. Didn't get the chance to say hello. We were both going 100 miles an hour. Exactly.
Right.
But I know, you did some great work. I got to sit in on one of your two sessions, and it's always one of my favorites. But tell us, since it's been a while since you've been on, give us a quick update. What's going on in your world, and what are you working on?
Well, that's a really good question. I have a new book coming out in March. It's the first fictional work I've done in 20 years. The Lord dropped this on me. It's a complete departure. I mean, complete departure from what I've been doing for the last 30 years, which is really, only he can do that, right? And Peggy and I were going to dinner. We're in the car, and I just get this download. It's like, oh my God. I look at Peggy, I go, oh my gosh, the Lord just gave me a novel. And I went home and sketched it and, pitched it to Charisma, my publisher, and they loved it. And we signed a deal, and it will come out this March. It's called The Waiting Room. And again, it's a fictional work, but just a quick overview. A guy who's a former airplane pilot had flatlines. He's in the hospital. He flatlines. Next thing you know, he's sucked through the tunnel of light, and he winds up in this beautiful room. The inlaid table, walnut table, the doors intricately carved, thick carpet. I mean, it's just a beautiful room. And this guy, who kind of looks like Albert Einstein and Doc from Back to the Future, comes in with a big file under his arm. And the protagonist's name is Bob. What am I doing here? What is this? Well, it's the waiting room. Well, what's the waiting room? Well, we have some issues that we have to deal with before you can go on. What do you mean issues? Well, it has to do with unforgiveness. And that's the whole book.
Wow.
I'll just give you a teaser. So Mr. O opens up. So he introduces himself as Mr. Olam, but you can call me Mr. O. It's Mr. O. So Bob goes, well, why? I thought I was supposed to see Jesus. And Mr. O goes, well, how do you know you're not seeing Jesus? Well, you don't look anything like him. And so Mr. O he's got glasses, and he kind of goes like that. It's all in the book, but the bottom line goes, well, let's look at the first one. Second grade, David, he pushed you up against the locker, and you punched him in the mouth and knocked out his front tooth, and you've never forgiven him for that. He was a bully. So Bob goes, yeah, well, so what? That's years ago. I never think of him. And Mr. O goes, no, but that's not true. From time to time, you do think of him, and always in a very negative way. You need to forgive him. And goes, what do you mean forgive him? And it goes back and forth like this. That's basically the whole book.
Wow.
Series of going through this man's life, realizing the amount of unforgiveness. And it gets into some really deep stuff. I mean, theologically, and there's like a little disclaimer in the front of the book and also in the back. I'm taking great liberty here. And one of the punchlines is, with David, the guy who pushed him up against the locker, and Bob goes, who cares? What does this matter? I mean, I haven't seen David in years. I don't even think about it. And Mr. will go, yeah, but you do think about it. And what happens if you run into him up here? And at that point, Bob goes, you mean he's here? Oh yeah, he's here. So there's a lot of humor in it, but there's a lot of really heavy stuff. I'll tell you this, I dedicated it to my girlfriend, whom I met when I was 16, and she was 14. And then when I was 18 and she was 16, She was killed in an automobile accident.
Hmm.
That event changed my life.
Hmm.
And so I dedicated the book to her.
Wow. So, I mean, you're right, LA, that's quite a departure. But I'm so glad the Lord put that on your heart to do it. Forgiveness is, man, unforgiveness is crippling, I believe, in the Christian's walk. And are any of the anecdotes in the fiction, are they drawn from your own personal life?
Oh, absolutely. There are vignettes all the way through it, which I can speak to once the book comes out and elaborate on them. But yeah, I mean, there are things from my own life. There are things that I've seen in other people through the years. And, isn't it interesting how Jesus says, unless you forgive those who trespass against you, your Father can't forgive you.
Mm.
Why would he say something like that? So, I mean, everything is forgiven. We're forgiven, but if we don't forgive, then we're in a really weird place. We don't want to go there. We don't.
Yeah. For sure. And like you said, it's not necessarily a theological book, it's a fictional book, but we do know theologically, since that's kind of my background and my world, there's judicial once for all forgiveness or positional forgiveness, but there's also practical forgiveness that really impacts our relationship with the Lord. I don't believe you're going to grow where God wants you to grow in your faith if you harbor unforgiveness.
So I completely agree. I've experienced that. I mean, I've harbored unforgiveness, and the Lord called me on account of this. Is like 30 years ago, and maybe even longer. And it was just like, the Lord, Holy Spirit gave me the scripture, which I just, unless you forgive those who trespass against you, those who hurt you, you're fine. And I just went, whoa! I dropped it like a hot potato.
Yeah.
So the book is like that. There's this place called the Escape Tunnel, which goes off the waiting room, and you don't want to go there.
Well, so it's called The Waiting Room, and you said it's slated for March?
Yeah, Charisma will publish it. It'll be out in March. Yeah.
Well, I wish we didn't have to wait so long, because now I'm pretty excited about it. But we'll have to have you back on to promote it. And I say this tongue in cheek, LA, but you'll get what I mean. Of course, a lot of skeptics out there of your work, and to a lesser degree some of the stuff I've addressed. They would say we're already writing fiction, but that's not true, is it? What we write about is absolutely a reality, and let's segue into that at this point. So you've got another project, the Nephilim Mounds. I tell you what, I never met a discussion related to the Nephilim that I didn't love, and so tell us about that.
Well, we did these series of conferences. The late Russ Disder and I put them on, and they all were in Ohio, right next to the Great Circle Mound. And there's another film I'm working on that deals with that, but I digress as usual. And Russ and I were there, and one of the original Mounds conference, we had Gary Stearman up, and Gary Stearman talked on Genesis 3:15, which we all went to school on that. And his topic was, it's all about the seed. And so Fritz Zimmerman is there, Chief Joseph Riverwind, Russ Disder, myself, Gary Stearman. So there's like, what is it? Like 11, actually, I don't have it in front of me, but there's it's like, I think 11 hours of information here, and it's packed. And then when you buy that, we also throw in Watcher 6, The Secret Cosmic War, which is our first trip to Peru. There's a lot of information in it. Great speakers. I mean, Russ has been gone now several years. I think it's coming up on 4 years, which is really unbelievable. So,
Now,
he was a great guy.
He was. Now, let me ask you this. This is just more from my personal recollection. In the conferences that you did through the years with Russ, do you recall, were any of those ever at sort of smaller hotels, not like the big giant ones, but I'm pretty sure I saw you guys. I mentioned this in my intro, which you didn't hear, but I followed you for years before we had the chance to meet, and really, appreciated your work. I heard you on Coast to Coast a number of times. And so I was traveling for our ministry for some other reason and staying at this hotel completely by providence. And I walk in, and there was a meeting room, down the hall with maybe, I don't know, 100 seats in it, and a sign out front. And I'm pretty sure I remember it said Russ Dizdar and L.A. Marzulli. Well, I knew both of your names. I'd never seen you or met you or read any of your stuff, but I gobbled up anything I could find on YouTube and whatnot. And so I wasn't registered for the conference. I was just staying there, but I snuck in the back, and that was my first time hearing you speak in person.
Oh.
But I loved Russ. Of course, I cite him, both of you, but I cite him in my Spirit of the Antichrist series, The Black Awakening, some of his work there. Yeah, we miss him, but we've still got work to do. Life goes on, and we'll see him again. We know that much. So the Nephilim mounds, one of them, and I'm sure you talk about this in the series. Tell us about the Serpent Mound in Ohio. Is that one of the ones you cover?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look right behind me, that's an illustration of a serpent mound. I wrote a paper on this, a new paradigm for the serpent mound. See, the New Agers look at this stuff and they interpret it through their lens. And I say, not so fast, citizen. So they look at the serpent, and in their New Age philosophy, the serpent is giving birth to the egg, which signifies wisdom. Excuse me. No, it's not. What you're looking at is Genesis 3:15. The serpent is in the act of trying to destroy the seed of the woman. That's what it's doing. The serpent mound is the greatest earthen mound on the planet. Now, if Derek Gilbert were here, he would chime in and say, not so fast, citizen, because it's a great serpent mound right very close to Gilgal Raphaim in Israel with all these dolmens on it. So, I get that. But this is the largest earthen mound, certainly in the North America, Central and South America, by far. And you can only really appreciate it from the air. And the serpent undulates through the Ohio countryside, and it's sitting on like a peninsula which overlooks a creek. And there's also a meteor which came in. There was also a stele, which is in the film, which Fritz Zimmerman and I found, which was erected probably right at the mouth. And that stele, does it have writing on it? We don't know. You would think that, the Archaeological Society of Ohio would get that thing, because it's probably 50 feet below. There's like a cliff there, and vandals took it and pushed it, but it's not broken. Is there writing on it? What are we looking at? So, Fritz and I were actually at one point trying to raise money to get this thing up and put it back where it was supposed to go. The last time I was there, which was on the spring equinox, there was a coven of witches. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And I recorded them. They wouldn't record their faces, but they came on the record vocally. There was a coven of witches. They knew exactly what it was, who it is that they served, who made it, the whole deal. They know. That's why they're there on the spring equinox. I mean, they're very in tune. This is also built on the a summer solstice. So where the mouth is open like this, and where the obelisk once stood, if you stood back, you would see the sunrise at the summer solstice come right in the serpent. And it's always the serpent. I mean, I've been all over the world. It's always the serpent. It's never a happy little bunny rabbit. It's the serpent. So
for sure. And I don't want to give too much away, because I want people to buy the project, the DVD series. But obviously Satan's earthly co-conspirators, they call themselves Luciferians. They pray and worship him the way you and I pray to Almighty God. And it is a spiritual battle. I talked about in my opening for this show, high strangeness, which I think is a phrase coined by J. Allen Hynek. I couldn't remember the name in my intro, but I'm pretty sure he's the one that coined that phrase. But this is absolutely weird stuff. And if you go to the museum associated with that serpentine mound, of course, they're going to tell you a totally different story, right? What's the official narrative of that?
the official narrative is that the Shawnee built it. It's always the Shawnee. Now the Shawnee did all this. And you go back, and the Shawnee goes, no, we didn't build this. It was here when we got here. That's what Chief Wallace, we have it on the record where she states that. When we came in, it was already here. Just like the Great Circle Mound and the Octagon Mound, which are Nephilim sites, I believe, in Ohio. Just parrot the same nonsense. The Shawnee built them. And, the reason for this is that there's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the world. And what we're showing, we're supernatural scientists in some way. We're showing that something else is going on here. If the Shawnee said that they didn't build it, then they didn't build it. But, the powers that be come in and put the signage up, the Shawnee built this, which is in direct, it's 180 degrees opposite of what Chief Wallace stated on the record. And build it. We were stewards of it, but it was here when we got here.
Yeah.
All that's, I'll tell you a story. Recently, we had a lead. I won't mention any names. I won't say where it was, but we had a lead from a museum somewhere in Ohio. Okay. So there was a box of bones that were found. Box of bones. There were some very large bones in that box. And immediately we'll say, all we want to do is come in, photograph, take DNA samples. We'll give you $1,000 donation to the museum. Well, in the span of 5 days, it's like that. The boss came down. Nope, we can't show them to you. I mean, the door just slammed shut. They were all willing to do it. Somebody got to them. And see, this is the problem, JB. This is really so problematic because a certain group of people control the narrative. And any evidence that goes against that narrative is dealt with immediately. What are they so afraid of? Why can't we look at the bones? We had an archaeologist set up. We had an anthropologist set up. We had a DNA lab set up. Nobody moved. Nobody was on airplanes yet because we needed to know that you were going to allow us to come in and look at these things. And just like that, somebody got to them. The powers that be, the higher ups, slammed the door. Why are they so afraid?
Yeah.
First of all, it's not your right to do that. That's the first thing. It's not your right to slam a door on the American people. Why are you so absolutely terrified of this information leaking out? Because it goes against the Darwinian paradigm. It ties into the Native American oral tradition about giants. It goes back and ties into the biblical prophetic narrative that giants walked the earth.
Yeah.
Terrified of.
When the Luciferians, when they control the media, which they do, and the textbooks and everything else, it's easy for them to pass on lies and control the narrative. I love your comment there made me think of the great George R.R. Martin quote from A Clash of Kings when he said, quote, "When you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say." And that's exactly what you're talking about. So
that's where we are. And it's really unfortunate, but I mean, that's where we are. We had a petition that Mondo sent up to some, congressman. We're probably never going to hear anything from it. I mean, it's a dog and pony show. No, nothing ever changes. Just like the whole UFO hearings in Congress, it's just another dog and pony show. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian, who knows what they have? I mean, I was the one. Look, see the skull in the background? That's called a cinnamon skull right there. And the little baby next to it. We unwrapped that baby's skull. And thank you, Brian Forrester, for setting that up. Thank you, Senior Juan Navarro, the Paracas History Museum, when he was still alive. And we went down there the first year, it was wrapped up. It was a mummy, wrapped up in a mummy bundle. And the next year he let us unwrap it. So we had Joe Taylor and Aaron, our archaeologist, was there. And we unwrapped this thing. And Chase Klotsky tagged and bagged stuff coming. We had hair that came right off of, and by the way, we did C14 dating. It's 1,935 years old. This is hard science. Science. Guess what? The mitochondrial DNA from 3 different labs, no collusion between the labs, no idea who I was. They won't touch my stuff now. You wonder why that is. Discrimination, anyone? Of course it has. All 3 labs came back U2E1. The mitochondrial DNA showed an Eastern European connection, U2E1. That rewrites history. Well, the academics, the scientific community, and everybody else doesn't want to rewrite history. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in that. This is showing that somebody arrived here in a new world 1,935 years ago. We are in the process of doing new DNA. I can't get into it too much, but we have a artifact that we are working on with a geneticist. And we also did C14 on that. That's 800 years old. So it's pre-Columbian, and we did DNA. The mitochondrial DNA came back to Levant, Middle East. So what's that doing in Bolivia? Why is it in Bolivia 800 years? That's a long time before Columbus ever touched down.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Satan is a liar from the beginning. Jesus said that in John 8:44, and so his earthly accomplices obviously are liars. They don't want the truth to come out because, for one thing, it would shine the light on the fact that there is a cosmic spiritual battle taking place that is intensifying. And by the way, I want to go back to what you said about that coven of witches. Another thing that reminded me of, and you're probably best suited more than anybody to kind of give the details, which are kind of sketchy to me. But I remember when Russ Dizdar died, the week before, I had heard him on a podcast with Hagman and Hagman, or Hagman. By that time, it was Hagman. And he was recounting a story which was not uncommon for Russ, where he had been engaged in some type of deliverance or something, and someone had, in the moment, had threatened to kill him and placed a curse on him, and they prayed and named the name of Christ, and God protected them in that moment. But if I recall, it was like a week later that he then got COVID, and I believe they killed him and his wife. But do you remember that story that he was someone put a curse on him?
Yeah, there were people that were doing that constantly. He was threatened many, many times. He never should have died. He never got help. He just thought it was the flu. So he never got any help, never did any medication, never did anything. So Shelley calls us up, Shelley Dizdar calls us up, and we're up on our upper deck eating dinner, and she just goes, "Russ is dead." And I just broke down right there. And the powers that be, her family, whatever, she was sick also. They took her into a hospital. I begged them not to do that. I begged them not to do that. 2 weeks later, she had the tube down her throat. That was it.
Well,
That's how the game is played. And we know that. Of course, if you say that, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Well,
Like Harvey Oswald's the lone gunman.
yeah, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, LA, except the ones that are true. And that's just about most of them. So, yeah, it's now let me ask you, in your line of work, and you really touch on some controversial issues and you expose the truth. Do you find yourself threatened sometimes?
I was threatened in 2016 by a guy from a deep state for our work on the Kandahar Giant. Again, we're supernatural scientists. A woman by the name of Laura and her husband, Bart, we had dinner with them. We were on vacation. They flew down and we met them for the first time, and they're just great people. And I was on the phone with Laura and Bart a few days ago, and Laura was going, LA, you're a supernatural scientist. And I go, well, I've never been called that before.
I love that. Yeah.
I do too. And she unpacked that. So what was interesting about it, everything that we've done, everything that we do, we're looking at things and exposing them. I mean, that's what we do. So the Kandahar Giant, when Richard Shaw, my late business partner, and myself exposed the Kandahar Giant, I was threatened by a guy from a deep state. And I was threatened, this is 2016, right before Trump got elected. So at the same time, the IRS was going after us and also Russ. We were told we owed hundreds of thousands of dollars back taxes, which wasn't true. They were basically trying to bankrupt us. Now that's conspiracy 101. But when you live with it and we squish, let me digress for a second. So we're under audit with the IRS. We know we don't owe this much money. We know that something's going on. Obama's president, right? And so we actually got audited more like 2014, something like that. And so we're in this thing, and my accountant at the time, he calls me up and he goes, "We can no longer represent you. Please come and get your file." Was there anyone in the office who can represent me? Why are you doing this? No, we can no longer represent you. There 2 weeks before the audit is supposed to happen. Call my friend. He gives me the name of an accountant who's been our accountant ever since. This guy's a bulldog. So he goes right after the IRS. First of all, Marzulli doesn't owe this much money. Bam, 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 bam. And said, why? And so all of a sudden it went from hundreds of thousands of dollars down to something way more manageable. And, okay, so there was a mistake and we rectified it. So the point I'm trying to make is we did the Kandahar Giant, and I'm contacted by a guy from a deep state who wants to meet with me. So in Dallas, there were death threats against me that conference in Dallas. They had a platform, a collapsible platform in the parking lot that was manned by police agents, whatever. That weekend, they had 2 plainclothesmen guarding me, and I didn't even know about it. And so I meet this guy in the lobby. I had a private bodyguard who was packing, and he shows me his ID. This is what he tells me. The first thing out of his mouth: "Do you have a cell phone?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "They can find kiddie porn on it when they come to arrest you." Whoa, okay. "What kind of car do you drive?" At the time, I was driving a 1991 Mercedes-Benz SL 500, which I had restored. Old car, great car, favorite car. I call it the go-kart. Bought it for next to nothing. So, all of you out there, "Oh, he has a Mercedes-Benz." Ha, ha, ha. "Oh, how much did you spend for your new Ford?"
Yeah, really.
Let's talk turkey here, pal. We'll get on that road. And he goes, "Well, does it have a computer?" And I go, "Yeah." "Well, we can fix the computer so you'll have an accident." Okay. "Do you have any children?" "I have 2 daughters. One of them can go missing and never be found again." And that's all in his opening salvo. When I look at him and I said, "I get it. I'm a worm. You can crush me, but you can't do anything unless the Most High God allows it." It was like a punch to his solar plexus. He actually took a step back. And I said that not because I'm some great warrior, because I'm not because I'm bold and I'm not. I said that because that's what I believe. I'm protected. But, the attacks are relentless. The enemy hates what we do. 2 months later, I'm driving the go-kart up one of the canyons here in the Santa Monica Mountains. I hear, "Poop." The car steering goes out. I'm out of control. I can't steer the car. I'm headed towards the cliff. No guardrails. Jam on the brakes, slide to a stop, pop the hood, look at the timing belt is broken. So when the tow truck driver, AAA, gets there 40 minutes later, I just show him the belt and I go, "Take a look at this." He looks at the belt and he goes, "Do you have any enemies?" The belt cut in 3 places.
Wow. Well, I mean, praise God, he protected you there. And by the way, if AAA got to you in 40 minutes, I feel like you're doing pretty good. That was a divine intervention too, just for that. But that incident in Dallas is remarkable. I hope you stay while you were in Dallas. I hope you stayed clear of the grassy knoll, because that doesn't end with
I went to the grassy knoll. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm the student of the JFK NFV too. If you've never been there, it's really compact. And when you stand behind that picket fence, there's an X on the asphalt, drive, and it's less than 60 feet away from the picket fence.
No doubt. Yeah. Yeah. No, I was trying to be cute just because you'd be in danger. But yeah, no, I completely agree. I've followed that for years. Donald Jeffries, you may know that name. He's been on the show, and I really appreciate his work. I don't know if he's a believer or not. He may be, but he's not. That's not what he's known for. But he is known for exposing the JFK assassination and many other things. Now, we've got just a little bit of time left, but I want to shift gears. And, oh, by the way, one other thing I wanted to say, I love that phrase, supernatural science. I say all the time that real science is a Christian's best friend. The problem is most science is bought and paid for and manipulated and agenda-driven. Do you know the name Richard Serrett as one of the guest hosts on Coast to Coast?
I've been on his show numerous times.
Okay, I was just going to ask you if you've been on there. Have you seen his latest October issue of Strange Planet and what he's written about, sort of a summary of Sarah McCarthy's book, Blue Butterfly, Inside the Diary of an Epstein Survivor? Have you seen anything about that?
Oh, but I'm familiar with Surratt. I'm familiar with the whole Epstein Mossad connection.
Okay, well, this is a little bit different one, and it's right up your alley. So I'm just going to throw it out there, and then you can sort of talk in generalities about this issue. But it relates to the whole abduction phenomena. So I'll send you his newsletter, and it might be worth getting the book. It's not out yet. I pre-ordered it on Amazon, and then they wrote, just last week they said, hey, it's going to be delayed. So I canceled the order, but I do plan to get it. But again, it's by Sarah McCarthy, and the book is called Blue Butterfly, Inside the Diary of an Epstein Survivor. And if it's true, it completely changes the whole complexion of this Epstein thing. In summary, her contention and Richard Syrett's contention is that it never was about sex trafficking or any of the horrible stuff that was also involved, but it was about experimentation, abductions, and she goes in and talks about waking up on a metal table surrounded by six figures in hazmat suits, and just typical types of accounts that we hear from people who've experienced the the abduction. So anyway, I just think that's pretty interesting. It'd be something maybe for your team to follow up on too, because it might add another layer to the whole abduction thing. But tell us a little bit about that, just in terms of another high strangeness and spiritual warfare that's happening in our day.
If you were going to keep the American Christian church and Christians in general, if you're going to keep them in the dark, you never teach Genesis 3:15. You never do it. So pastors coming into the seminary, they're taught the Sethite theory. Well, the Sethite theory doesn't happen until the 4th century. So and this is my point. When Jesus says to the crowd, it'll be like the days of Noah when I return. Well, what do you mean when you return? Where are you going? So, he's speaking some real heavy stuff here. He's really laying it down in ways that are just cosmically mind-boggling. So everyone in earshot knows exactly what he's talking about when he says the days of Noah. How do we know that? Because Josephus, 1st century historian, tells us that the bones of the giants, the bones of the Nephilim, were openly on display in Jerusalem and were there until Titus and the crew came in and destroyed Jerusalem, which means when you went up to the Temple Mount, the bones weren't in the temple or the outer court, but they were in a byway, a lane, a whatever you want to call it, a street that the people coming into the Temple Mount would have seen. Everybody knows exactly what he's talking about. Yeah, this is what our ancestors killed. Look, there's what's left of Goliath's body. It's 12 feet tall. Oh my gosh. And so when Jesus says that, everybody knows. So the knucklehead, Julius Africanus, in the 4th century, invents the Sethite theory. He just pulls the theological rabbit out of his coffee mug somehow. How does that work? And now that ruse is taught in seminaries. So the sons of God become the godly line of Seth, and the women of earth are the hoochie mamas of Cain. That's not what the text says. And so most people have no idea what's going on. So all that to say this, that the seed war is continuing. Daniel 2:43, their seed will mingle with the seed of men. They will not cleave to them. No marriage. We're just going to take. It's exactly what's going on. Daniel sealed the words in this book. Until the time of the end, men and women were to and fro with the face of the earth, knowledge will increase. That's where we are now. Their seed, whose seed? Whose seed? Their seed will mingle with the seed of men. So it can't be men. So you tell me who it is. Hippopotami? I don't think so. I don't think the hippos are going to be doing that.
Yeah.
Angels. This is why it's critical. When Jesus says they'll be like the days of Noah, church doesn't even know what he's talking about. They don't know. Oh, it's lawlessness. They were eating and drinking. See, don't be doing that. No idea. Who are they? They're not human beings. They're the fallen angels who are in the Nephilim, who are eating and drinking and taking wives and fornicating and completely corrupting everything except for Noah and his sons and their sons' wives. That's it.
Wow, that's a whole different, something you just said there is a nuance of that passage that I had not thought before, that the ones eating and drinking and giving in marriage were the fallen angels. It makes sense. It certainly makes sense. That's what happened in Genesis 6,
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So fascinating. And you're right, by the way. I spent some time ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, talking to about half a dozen of my friends in the academic world, dispensationalists, good conservative, pre-tribulation guys, about Daniel 2:43, and none of them really had a good answer. They weren't like dismissive. In fact, a couple of them were like, that's really intriguing, but I've never really made the connection to Genesis 3:15. But I mean, I don't know what other connection you can make.
That is the connection. This is why it's paramount. Thank you, Gary Stearman. Genesis 3:15 is the gateway to the Bible. Had the right exegesis there, and the whole Bible opens up. You understand, who is the son of perdition? Who is Rosemary's baby? Yeah. Why would they even make a film like that? Because they're telegraphing that it's happened. That's what they're doing, or that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Telegraph. I saw that movie before I was a Christian. Very dark, very ominous. Don't go see it.
All right.
It gives birth to the Antichrist.
Yeah. Hey, no, I get it. I get it. Yeah. Well, LA, always a pleasure. I mean, we could talk all day, but I know you're one of the busiest,
Thanks, JB.
busiest guys on the planet. But anyway, tell folks how to get in touch with you and they can get some of this great stuff.
I mean, look, there's 33 films, 14 books, 15's coming out in March. LAMarzulli.com. There's links to everything. You can download the films and watch them streaming at LAMarzulli.net. And do your homework, folks. We've scratched the surface. So there you go.
Amen. Well, thanks so much, brother. God bless you and God bless everyone. And we will talk again soon.